love is important. See, it's not the familial love. It's not the love you have for your kids it's the love of human beings because they're worthy of love. And that's what I'm talking about here. And yeah, I think that love has its place in the workplace. And when you approach it like that, then how you interact with other people is completely different than if you are always judging them and if you think they're not worthy of love. It has a whole different attitude of how you treat other people. Basically, the same thing we did in the U.S. we brought to Japan. People are people. I don't care where you go in the world. The same things apply. Everybody wants to be treated with respect and dignity. Everybody wants to love and be loved. Everybody wants to grow as human beings. Everybody wants more for themselves and their family. And all the rest is just commentary. It's the basic human traits whole. And yeah, the culture's different. Do they eat different food? Yeah, do they have different religions? Yeah, certainly. But we're all the same.
Before we get into the show, I'd like to say a huge thank you to our sponsor, First Human, of which I am a co-founder. First Human is dedicated to extraordinary impact in the world through exceptional leadership. So if you're looking to elevate the leadership of your team or your organization, then do check us out. We also offer one-to-one coaching. So if you'd like to get coached by me or one of my extraordinarily talented fellow coaches, then head over to firsthuman.com. And with that, back to the show. And we are live with another episode of Being Human. I'm delighted to say I'm here with Howard Behar. He's the author of this book. It's not about the coffee, leadership principles from a life at Starbucks. And it really was a life at Starbucks, 21 years. Roles included the founding president of Starbucks International, as well as the president of North America. So you really were a integral part of the story of the extraordinary growth of Starbucks as an organization. You've written this fantastic book, which encapsulate everything, well, perhaps not everything, but a good part of what you learnt as a leader at Starbucks. So I'm absolutely delighted, Howard, to have you on the show. A warm welcome from Palm Springs.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here. I appreciate the invitation.
I really appreciate having you here. Now, I understand a little bit of your backstory from having read the book, but where I like to start with all my guests is, a little bit about your childhood, how you grew up, what shaped you early on to become the leader that you ultimately were destined to be at Starbucks and elsewhere. So, take us back to your childhood, Howard.
Well, I'm the son of two immigrants. My father came to the United States as a 15-year-old in 1911. My dad was actually born in 1895, and he left all his family behind except for one brother that he had in Vancouver, British Columbia, and he went to meet him there, and they both immigrated to Seattle. And so I'm the son of two immigrants. My mother came from Latvia in 1917, just after the revolution, and she was the youngest of a family of 13 children. And they all, for the most part, all made it to the Seattle area. So that's how I grew up. I grew up, as a typical child of immigrants who never let you forget where they came from and the difficulties they had as young children. So, it formed me as a child. And my father worked in a public market in 1911 in Seattle and ended up saving his pennies, nickels, and dimes and opened up a small mom and pop grocery store in Seattle. And that's how we lived. We didn't have a lot, but we always had fruit and vegetables on the table, sometimes a little bruised or a little brown, but we never starved to death.
Right.
And you learn those lessons very early in life, when your parents came from difficult times, they don't let you forget.
And what were your first experiences of leading as a kid? Were you like a natural leader, an organizer, or did that come later?
It really, I think it came later. It came, when I finally I got into my teenage years. I got into leadership roles and at school and things like that. But it really didn't develop until I was really in my 20s when I finally figured out that for me, it was about servant leadership. And I wanted to be a conscious, competent in servant leadership. In essence, I wanted to understand what it meant and I wanted to be able to teach it. And that didn't happen until my mid 20s.
Right. And so when did that realization happen? Did you start off with one mode of leadership? Like what was your first sort of formal management role or leadership role?
My first formal one, I was 21 years old and I managed a small furniture store in the state of Oregon. And, I was just Howard being Howard. I never thought about what leadership meant. The word leadership just wasn't in my lexicon. It was just managing a store, doing the things you need to do, keeping the store clean and getting sales, making sure you had enough salespeople and you delivered the furniture, so it was more of that. And about my mid 20s, somebody gave me this little pamphlet called um, The Leader as Servant, written by a man named Robert Greenlee. And he formed the term servant leadership. And that opened my eyes. I said, gee, there's something more about this than I ever thought. And the words I never thought about, a model of leadership until I'd read that book. And when I read that book, I said, that's who I want to be. And so that began my journey. And I've been on that same journey for almost 60 years now.
Wow. And what did you start to do differently having read that book?
Well, I started to be conscious about the things I said and how I did things. And I started to ask myself questions. How would I like to be treated? And how do other people like to be treated? And what works and what doesn't work? And so I started reading every leadership book I could get my hands on, particularly the ones that advocated servant leadership, which was an idea that I really glammed onto. Because servant leadership is primarily defined as this: your job as a leader is to serve your people first, to help them first grow as individuals, to grow as professionals, and then help them achieve the goals they have for their lives. And when you do that well, then they want to help you. And that's kind of how the journey started.
Right. And well, we might as well dive into it because I'm sure there's going to be some people listening to this will have a reaction to that, right?
Sure.
Yes, but that's just the nicey. It's not. You're right. And isn't a leader's job more than that? Isn't it about setting a vision and providing direction? Like
Of
that.
course.
Yeah, might be the sort of typical, because you must have heard it a number of times, right? The critique to servant leadership and your response.
Yeah, sure. Well, yeah, servant leadership at its core is about performance.
Mm.
It's about getting the job done. But instead on the back of the backs of people, it's with people. Instead
Mm.
of the idea that leaders are there to be served and whatever they say goes, with the whip in hand, say, go horses, is, the leader's job is to help the people achieve the goals of the organization. And sure, absolutely. It's not about, it's not, everybody thinks servant leadership is this soft, mushy stuff. It's anything but. It's just how you do it. It's treating people with respect, with dignity, not trying to manipulate them, but trying to encourage them and to coach them and to help them be all they can be. And it's a model that works. It's just the facts of life. Nobody likes to be yelled at or screamed at or demeaned that I know. Maybe there's a few people, all Trump's fans, they want to be demeaned, and, kind of, that's a political statement. I probably should have stayed away. If that's okay.
I'm sure. Well,
I'm 80 years old. I should be able to say what I want to say.
yeah.
Anyway, no, it's about turning in the performance, about getting the job done with people.
Yeah.
That's the difference.
Right. And so you adopted this, you absorbed everything you could related to that topic.
Sure.
And yeah, where did it go from there? Like, so you're managing a furniture store, you read this book, what's the next big move?
Well, I started to practice those skills and to hone in those skills and to read more. I became a big acolyte of Peter Drucker.
Oh yeah.
who was actually a contemporary of Robert Greenleaf. And Peter Drucker is probably one of the foremost educators in leadership development. And although he didn't call it servant leadership, he followed along exactly the same principle of how you treated people. And so I kept learning from him. And as I went from managing a furniture store to managing a chain of furniture stores to managing a very large furniture store, huge scale, to managing a group of parks that were geared to RV owners around the United States, about 50 of them. And from there, I went to Starbucks. Started at Starbucks when there were 28 stores, and when I retired, there were 15,000. I had to grow. I mean, it wasn't, it's not all about leadership style. It was also about our leadership models. It was also about, how to make money, how to make things profitable, how to do all the things that you had to learn to do in managing a large organization. I became the founding president of Starbucks International. Now, I not only had stores all around the world.
Yeah.
And eventually, when I was there in 50-some countries. So, you have to continue to grow. I had to continue to grow. But I always relied on the idea about serving others first. And because I did that, people respected me. And they felt that I was there for them. They weren't just there for me.
Right. Yeah. And take me through then the scenario where you end up, working with Howard Schultz and getting pulled into Starbucks. Because as I understand it from the book, it came off the back of a difficult situation, which I think you described as a failure, if I'm not overstating it, and then you ended up in that situation where this opportunity arose. Yeah, I'm interested in that transition.
They became, you're talking to a guy that barely got out of high school. I had 2 years of community college. So, I'm not the most brilliant guy on the block, but I was a good learner. And I ended up being president of a land development company. And, the truth of the matter is I didn't even know what that meant. And I had to grow in the job, and the company got in trouble. We ended up having to sell it. And so, I got let go of the company, and I was trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life. And so I decided that I wanted to go back to my roots. I wanted to own a small business of some kind. But I started looking for small businesses to buy. And along that way, I met this young guy named Howard Schultz, who was then basically the CEO of the small coffee company called Starbucks. And I met him because I had a friend named Jeff Brotman, who was one of the co-founders of Costco. I'm sure your listeners.
Yeah.
And so, he introduced me to Howard, and he said, "You two need to meet." So I met Howard for breakfast one morning, and he was looking for a vice president of operations. And although I wasn't really that interested, I was going to listen to him because you never know what you need in life and what comes along. And so I did. And he had a list of criteria that he wanted. The first thing, he needed somebody that had a college degree. I didn't have that. Then he wanted somebody with food service background. I didn't have that. Finally, we got down to number 10, can you breathe? And of course, I'm being facetious, but it was almost the truth. And I said, yeah, I can breathe. But that was the only thing on that list I really qualified for. So we shook hands and parted company, and I was still interested in my own business. And about a year later, I happened to run into Howard again because of a friend. And he hadn't filled his position. I still hadn't found a business to buy. And we got together again, and, he was still looking for that VP of operations. I said, why don't you let me work in the company for a week for free? You don't pay me. I'd like to work on the stores for a few days. I'd like to work on the delivery trucks for a few days and in the roasting plant for a few days. And then let's talk at the end of that week. And so by the end of that week, I'd fallen in love with Starbucks. Unfortunately, Howard had heard through the grapevine that I'd done a pretty good job in that week, and people liked me and felt that I was qualified. And he offered me a position. And I turned right instead of turning left. Luck is where opportunity meets preparation. Unfortunately, I was prepared, and the opportunity came along, and the rest became history.
Yeah. Well, there's so many lessons in that story as well. Just the humility. I'll work for free, and I'll I'll take a risk here and put faith,
Right.
and yeah, it came through. Brilliant. And he takes you, but initially you don't move into the international business, right? You have a role in North America because yeah,
Domestic. I was running operations in domestic business,
yeah.
America.
And then the call came. Where was it? Where was the first coffee shop outside of the US?
It was in Tokyo.
Right.
And the call didn't come. I pitched it. I was on the board of directors. By that time, I'd gotten on the board of directors at Starbucks, and I did a business plan and made the presentation to the board. We actually wanted to come to the UK and to Japan simultaneously, and the board was afraid of that, and so they said, pick your poison. And I picked Asia Pacific because Seattle is a Pacific Rim city, and our roasting plant was in Seattle, and we could get a container of coffee to Japan within a week. It was a lot longer journey to getting it to the UK. And so I made the pitch to go to Japan first, and we did that. And the rest is history. We started to open across Asia Pacific. We opened in Japan, Korea, Taiwan, Indonesia, Malaysia. We opened in China, and now we're in India. We're in Vietnam, et cetera. So we were
Wow.
all over. We were all over it, Asia Pacific.
Well, talk me through the opening of Tokyo. I mean, you don't know the language. You don't know if this product is going to work. I mean, yeah. How does that go?
Through a lot of sweat and concern and worry and no sleepless night and no nights with sleep in them. And so I believe Japan, I didn't just do it out of thin air. I studied the market. I went and visited 3 or 4 times, and we did everything with joint venture partners. So they were going to be the operating partner, and we would put up half the money, and they would put up the other half, and they would operate the business. And so I found a really great partner who I believed in, and the first criteria was, how did they treat their people? That was number one on the list. And we had other criteria. They run multi-unit retail operation, and that was important. And then did they have the economic resources to do it? And so, I found a great partner, a company named Sotheby in Japan, and wonderful people. And they ended up, they were the business. So we were there with them. We had a board of directors that ran Starbucks Japan, and I was on that board. And I was in Japan once a month for 7 years. And so, it doesn't just happen. You're building it from scratch. And we went with what we knew. We couldn't create new products for Japan because we didn't know what wouldn't sell, what would sell, or what we had. So we just opened with what we knew, and then we adjusted as we went. We added different flavors, different types of food and drinks as we learned more along the way. And now Japan has 2,000 stores in.
Oh, really?
Now,
And so was there an existing coffee culture there?
sure, yeah,
Right.
everybody thinks Japan is a tea consuming country. It does consume a lot of tea, but it was the fourth largest coffee consuming country in the world.
Oh, okay.
And so there were lots of what they call kiseten, which were coffee shops, primarily uh, men's areas to go have coffee and have conversation. And we weren't going down that track. We wanted to be egalitarian, open to everybody, men and women. And so that's what we did.
And it worked. Men accepted having women in their
Yeah.
coffee shops. Yeah, great. Good. Well, I'm interested particularly in the Japan angle because I've been a student of lean, and of course the Toyota productions
Yeah.
system. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but at the core of that is respect for people, and so it seems like you found a receptive culture for the ideas of servant leadership there.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah. Great. And then you grew the business, this international business, based on your principles. And did that give you an opportunity to grow a culture that was a purer expression of your ideas, or were you successful already within the US operation, bringing a lot of your principles into the culture?
I brought what I knew. That's all I could do.
Mm.
I was not a Japan expert, so I certainly wasn't going to be that. I was a Starbucks expert, and I understood business, but I went with what we knew, and we let our partners have a big say in how we did things. But basically, the same thing we did in the U.S. we brought to Japan, and then, like I said, we adjusted as we went.
Yeah.
But people are people. I don't care where you go in the world. The same things apply. Everybody wants to be treated with respect and dignity. Everybody wants to love and be loved. Everybody wants to grow as human beings. Everybody wants more for themselves and their family. And all the rest is just commentary. It's the basic human traits whole. And yeah, the culture's different. Do they eat different food? Yeah, do they have different religions? Yeah, certainly. But we're all the same.
Yeah. 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 Well, and diving into the book and your principles already, I think we're speaking into one of your principles, which is think independently, let the person who sweeps the floor choose the broom.
Correct.
And it sounds like you were already living that principle in partnering in Japan and handing off a lot of that decision making to the person
Yeah,
you're in joint venture with.
I led like I led in the United States. I really didn't find any difference. Yeah, I mean there were, like I said, there were some cultural differences, but they weren't game breakers. There were maybe things that you had to learn of how you talk with people a little bit. Distances between your faces. How you that kind of thing, but nothing that really got in the way. And look, I had the same smile on my face in Tokyo or Dubai, or Kuwait or wherever, as I did in the United States. That couldn't be any difference. Howard could only be Howard. I couldn't be Japanese Howard and Kuwaiti Howard, and I couldn't be London Howard. I had to be Howard, and that's what I brought.
And doesn't that speak to an anecdote in your book about when you got some tough love about being Howard and just wearing the one hat?
Yeah, well, yeah, when I got tough love, but somebody was trying to change Howard, a guy who was a CEO of a company that I'd worked at, and he wanted me to be different than what I was. It wasn't like he was asking me to change the color of my slack. He was asking to change, everything that I'd become innately. And the problem was I didn't know really who Howard was. I really hadn't defined myself. And during that time where I learned about Robert Greenleaf, I started working on Howard. Who is Howard? And I created this document, a picture of Howard in 50 words or less. And I began with my personal mission statement, what my values were, and what I call my 6 Ps, how I live my life. And those things drove me. And I started to get comfortable with that. So when somebody said, well, Howard, you're not who I think you should be, then I can have an intelligent conversation about who I thought I was and why I was out. And I'm more than willing to adjust things that I do, but I got so I wasn't willing to change my values. My values were my values, not theirs.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that section in the book. Know who you are. And that concept of a hat and just wear one hat. And
Yeah, you get up in the morning, you put on your hat. If you're laying in bed with your significant other or your spouse, if you have to put on your spouse hat, you better evaluate if you're married to the right person. If you go to work and you got to put on your Starbucks hat, you better be thinking twice about whether this is the right place for you. And we get so people will always wanting us to change our hat. They don't just want us to change our hat; they want us to put on their hat.
right.
Right? And if you want to have a fulfilling life, you better figure out who you are and then wear your hat.
Yeah. Yeah. And don't yeah, and I suppose also the principle here for leadership is not try and make people wear a different hat, right? And if it's not, and you talk, there's a few examples in the book where you let people go. You're just like, you come to an acceptance that this person with this hat isn't going to work in this environment.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. No, I like that. You use the word love, which I appreciate in chapter 3 when you talk about build love, and you talk about not many MBA courses have how to love 101. I
Yeah,
love that.
it's amazing, isn't it? always amazes me because love is important. See, it's not the familial love. It's not the love you have for your kids or it's the love of human beings because they're worthy of love. And that's what I'm talking about here. And yeah, I think that love has its place in the workplace. And when you approach it like that, then how you interact with other people is completely different than if you are always judging them and if you think they're not worthy of love. It has a whole different attitude of how you treat other people.
Yeah. And I love your bringing light to that. And I don't know if are you familiar with Bob Chapman and his book Everybody Matters?
Yeah, I am. Yeah, it's a great
Yeah.
book.
And he has a similar principle. For him, it's caring, and you also mentioned that word, caring, and how to care, right? But the same principle, and you're right that it's not taught in MBAs. It's also just not taught in education in general. Even my wife, who's a dentist, they're not. The quote caring professions. They're not given
Yeah,
courses on how to love or how to care. So it's like it's a blind spot in modern
yeah.
society.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because we all need it,
Yeah,
right? I mean, without love, without knowing that another human being really deeply cares about us, it's very difficult to care for yourself.
yeah,
And those models have to come from primarily the people that raise us, the people that we associate with. And, I believe that, this is maybe out in someplace in the ozone, but I believe the primary role of public education is to teach people how to be better parents.
right.
And everything flows from that. Yeah. And we also teach them maybe how to have careers and things, but the primary role should be how to teach people to be better parents or have better relationships if you want to get it to, without the parenting
Mm,
issue,
mm.
to have better, more productive relationships and caring and loving people.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I absolutely agree. Why is that not, just why is that not central to our educational ethos?
Problem.
Yeah. But I think the outcome is it puts us all in our heads and not in our hearts. And,
Yeah,
that's has an impact. Um, okay. The next principle, which I appreciated was, from your chapter, listen for the truth. And this concept of compassionate emptiness. Could you talk about compassionate emptiness?
sure. Well, if you're anything like me, we have a gene, a male gene, right? And that male gene wants to solve problems and take over when your significant other, your wife, or your children come to you. It's not the listening gene. It's the gene of talking and not listening. And so compassion and emptiness go. I think, in my late 40s when I was reading this book, and I had all the typical problems. My wife is a professional, a lot smarter than I am. She has a PhD in social work, and my kids are smart, but they come with their problems. I immediately wanted to jump in and solve the problems. Well, did you do this? How about this? Why don't you try this? But what she wanted, which I didn't just understand well enough, she just wanted me to listen, not to respond, but just to listen. And if she wanted my opinion, she'd ask me for it, And so I was reading this book, and in the book was this 2-word quote: compassion and emptiness. It meant being full of compassion, but empty of opinion. And, I went, oh, that's it. That's the answer. Right. And so I started trying to practice compassion and emptiness. I started to really practice really listening without trying to come up with a solution in my own head. Even if I didn't say it, I needed to be empty and just let it all flow in and show her that I cared and that I had empathy for what she was dealing with. And I had to do the same thing with my kids because they stop talking to you when all you do is give them advice.
Mm.
They want it. They just want you to listen. And so that little 2-word quote has become one of the most important 2-word quotes in my life.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's like if there's one skill one could choose to master in their lifetime, that would be it, right? Yeah, yeah, wonderful. Um, Next is be accountable. And yeah, you mentioned a story which I appreciated about there was a list of people who were going to get laid off,
Right.
and you were faced with a situation there. Yeah, could you talk us through that?
So I had just become president of this land development company, and my first time of being president of anything. And so as I got into the job, I realized we had a big economic problem. So, I got my direct reports together and I said, we got to deal with this. And so we met on a Friday all day trying to decide what we were going to do. And we knew we were going to have to let some people go. We were going to have some layoff. I'd never been through a layoff, so I wasn't sure myself. But we developed a plan, and in those days, no computers, IBM Selectrics. So my administrative assistant was typing everything on the IBM Selectric, and so now we had this plan typewritten. And the head of human resources took the plan, and they went to the copier to make copies for everybody. Well, she left the original on the copier in the afternoon. And by 8 o'clock that evening, my phone was ringing off the hook. Somebody had found it. The chain goes through the company, right? Telephone and telegraph and, people talking. And, I figured, man, my days of being a president of this organization now are really numbered because this got out. So I called the meeting for the next morning. It was Saturday morning with my direct reports again. And I went around the room and I asked everybody, what should we do? And, most of the people said, well, just don't acknowledge it. Just say it's not something we're going to do. It's just something we're, thinking about and evaluating, but don't worry about it. And then my administrative assistant, her name was Lori Christmas. She tapped me on the shoulder and she said, Howard, only the truth sounds like the truth. Only the truth sounds like the truth. And I looked at her and I said, Lori, you're right. So the next Monday morning, I got the whole team together, all the people that worked at the company, about 1,500 people. And we had this big gymnasium that we all met in. And I told everybody what was going on, and I told them the truth. I told them I didn't know who was going to get laid off, but by the end of the week, everybody would know. I thought they were going to hand my head to me on a silver platter. And instead, one young guy stood up and he said, Howard, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you telling us the truth. And I don't know if I'm going to be one of the ones that get laid off, but I'll tell you what, I will help you do what you need to do and to save the company. And one by one, everybody stood up and everybody started applauding and everybody committed to doing what they all needed to do to help the company survive. It's probably one of the most valuable leadership lessons I'd ever learned. Only the truth sounds like the truth. Tell them the truth. They can deal with it. If you're honest, if you're authentic, if you're vulnerable, and not everybody might like it, and maybe somebody's going to get mad at you, but it's the best way to deal with problems.
Mm.
And I don't mean scare them, but I mean give them the truth as you know, and then also give them the positive stuff too along the way. But don't lie.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think I'm gonna take that one away. Only the truth sounds like the truth.
Yeah.
And did you manage to save anyone?
Did
Is there?
we ended up having to sell the business.
Okay.
Business got in trouble. We still had to have a layoff, but the business, but we saved the business in order to sell it.
Right. The other thing I liked in here that I think this is from Starbucks now. You refer to the central operation as the support center and not as HQ.
Right.
And talk about how that relates to accountability.
That's what it is. It was a support center. It was there to support the people in the field. We didn't produce a dollar's worth of revenue at the support center. What we did was enable the people that were doing that work to do their jobs well and effectively. And our job was to get out of the way. Let the person who sweeps the floor should choose the broom. Who knew more about operating the stores than the baristas and the store managers and the district managers that were doing that? And so we needed to listen to them and then act on their advice, right? It wasn't, leaders tend to think that, their role is to have answers and solutions, but it's really not. It's to have the right questions. Your job isn't to have all the answers. It's to know the right questions to ask, and that to help people implement the right solutions to those questions, and with taking input from the people. And so that's really critical. And so it really is a support center. It really is not a headquarters or a home office. It is there to support the people doing the work. And we get confused by that because we have this big office, we have offices, we think we're vitally important, and we have our role to play.
Yeah.
And that's it. We have our role to play. But the most important people in the company are the ones doing the work in the field. Those are the people that are closest to those human beings we serve, those human beings we call customers.
Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate that. It reminds me of, are you familiar with Handelsbanken? The
Uh,
European bank? No, but they have a similar ethos, but they're extremely successful banking operation. Yeah, they have a similar ethos, and it makes a huge amount of sense. You also include in this quote, "Turn fear into faith." You're quoting Ray Kroc there. Yeah, tell me more about turning fear into faith.
well, all of us as we're living our lives, right? We encounter experiences that scare the hell out of us, that make us frightened, that make us doubt our own use, our own value, and make us doubt whether or not we can do the job. And I remember reading that quote. It was from Ray Kroc at McDonald's, and he said, "You got to turn your fears into faith. You got to believe that you can, because if you don't, you surely can't." And so it was, I'm a quote guy. It's how I learned. So I had probably 200 quotes on my office wall. And that was one of the important ones, is turning your fears into faith and believing that you can, and that if you give it your all, you'll find your pathway through your problem.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
really,
yeah, and it's well, we'd call it in modern parlance would be a reframe, but yeah,
yeah,
I love that.
yeah.
Um, Tell me about Mazagran. Is that right?
Mazagran. Yeah. Well, Mazagran was an abject failure at Starbucks. It was a product that we were developing as a joint venture with Pepsi Cola. And it basically was a coffee cola. It was like a Pepsi only with flavored with real coffee. And the name came from a French Foreign Legion in Africa. And they would drink these naturally carbonated water with coffee in it. And so we thought, why couldn't we do something like that? And so we did all the work on it. We invented the product. We had a beautiful bottle. We tested it and we introduced it. And 6 months later, it was dead. It didn't work. So all the best laid plans of mice and men, right? But it shows where failure can lead to great success. So because of its failure, we were still saying there was some kind of bottled coffee product that we could introduce. And so we had a product called Frappuccino in our stores. And so we took Frappuccino and we figured a way to bottle it, and it became a massive success. So from great failure of Mazagran to great success of bottled Frappuccino. And
But
you never know when sometimes you have failures, but you can't give up.
yeah, and what I loved in the book, you put it in a perspex case, the
I did.
Mazagran. But
Not in this office, in another office I have it. So I never forget that it was a failure, but there was success that came from it.
and celebrating it,
Yeah,
yeah, like honoring this failure, right? Because you got out there, and you tried.
right.
Yeah, yeah, uh, yeah, yeah. Um, you talk about practicing leadership, and then you there's this quote there, if or mantra you say you describe it as, I think, if you don't produce results, shame on you. Uh, if you don't produce results, shame on you. If you don't produce results twice, shame on me.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Well, that has to do with the idea of you have people that report to you, right, that are doing their work. And, not everybody comes along at the pace that you'd like them to come along. And not everybody gets the results that you'd like for the organization. So, you have to own it yourself. You can't assign it to somebody else. Only you can do your work. And you can ask for help, but you got to do that. You got to ask for help. And so the idea behind that was that if somebody isn't getting the job done, then you can coach them, but they have to own it. You can't own it for them. And if they continually do not get results after you've done all you can do to help them, then if you don't do something about it, shame on you as the leader. Then you either have to find another place where they can be productive or invite them to lead your organization. And that's the way it is, because at the end of the day, it's performance that counts. Human beings don't like that word performance. We don't want to be evaluated. We don't want to be judged. The facts are we're getting evaluated and judged every day. Trust me, your wife is evaluating your performance, right?
Yeah.
They don't always
My audience is evaluating my performance on this podcast right now.
Yeah, exactly. So, that's the way that it is. So, and we get evaluated and we've got to perform up to expectations, no matter what that is. Perform evaluation of being a husband, being a wife, being a father, being a child, being a leader in an organization. Your people are evaluating you. That's the way that it is in life. And so we have to perform, and we have to perform up to expectation.
Yeah. And I appreciate that as the other side of servant leadership, the side that people don't immediately infer from the term.
Well, it's really not the other side. It is core.
Sorry.
It's core to servant leadership. It is what primarily servant leadership is about. It's about getting performance, but with people, right? And not by abusing people. And so it's just how you do it. It's not the what you're doing.
Yeah. No, got it. Your final principle, great one to end on. Dare to dream.
Yeah. When I was in my, as I grew up with a mother that always was saying to me, Howard, don't worry, not everybody can be, and my mother was the last born of 13 children. She, they never had anything. They were dirt poor, but she had the proverbial spoon. She was never judged. And my mother wasn't highly motivated to do things. She was a great mother and worked hard, stuff like that. But she was always saying, I was always coming home and say, I want to do this, I want to do that. And she was always trying to relieve me of that internal conflict by saying, don't worry, Howard, not everybody can be this or be that. And I internalized it as if I couldn't, if I wasn't capable, until I finally got mad and I said, I am capable. And I pushed back against my mother. I would never let my mother say that to me again. And so it was, I just didn't believe in myself. And as I started to work on Howard, I realized that was core to getting anything done. There was a book written by a man named Claude Bristol, and it's way out of print now. It was written in the 1920s, and it was called The Magic of Believing. And I read that book once, and he said, however you think is how you'll act. And so I started doing affirmations, and one of my core affirmations was, I am enough, I have enough, I do enough. Another one, I love myself unconditionally. And I started to do affirmations around things that maybe that I didn't believe in myself, that I was capable and that I could do things. And you got to fake it till you make it sometimes, and that's what I started doing. And I started, it wasn't just, I went from not believing to totally believing. I always had doubts. I still have doubts. I still have my insecurities and I still deal with those, but I have tools to help me get out of that. And I work my way through it. Like, I because I didn't have a college degree, I was always a little bit unsure. I was working with people that had MBAs and out of Stanford and Harvard, and I wasn't sure that I measured up until finally I understood that I did. I just had different set of experience and different knowledge, and I could use those to, do my work. And so that's really what it was all about. And over time, I learned that I was capable and I could do things. And And like I say, I still struggle with it today, but I have the internal motivation to carry on and to turn my fear into faith.
Yeah. So there was obviously something you knew in a kid. There was a real strong impulse
Yeah.
to craft yourself as someone different, even from that. Because how old were you when you stood up to your mother?
Oh, I was older. I was not young. I was in my 20s.
Okay, so that started. So that this working on how it started in your 20s. Okay,
Yeah. It's really when I really started working on myself was in my 20s, when I started to ask questions I'd never asked. And people ask me, well, what would you do differently in your life? I would have, I would have hopefully been introduced to the ideas of how you can grow yourself as a human being when I was in grade school. I would have
mm,
encouraged more, to look at myself and to understand that I was capable. I didn't have any of that. I was the baby of my family. My brother was 10 years older. My sister was 14 years older. My parents didn't have high expectations of me. Really
yeah,
didn't. And I had to develop those for myself.
yeah, yeah,
And
and
sometimes you have to do that. You know, my parents didn't have negative expectations. They just didn't have high expectations. And both are sad, right? We should, as parents, we have to encourage our kids, to do what they want to do, to be all they can be in their lives, and to support them in their journeys. It may not be the journey that we would choose for them, but it's their journey, not your journey. And to treat them with love and caring and respect. And that doesn't mean that you don't hold them accountable. You do, but you do it in a loving, caring way.
mm,
And it makes a huge difference. That's why at the beginning of this conversation, I said, the most important thing we should learn in education is how to be a better human being, how to be a better parent.
yeah.
Not only a parent to your children, a parent to yourself.
Well, that's what you're doing with your affirmations, right?
Is
You're reparenting, right? You're giving yourself the belief you weren't given as
I,
a kid.
I'm being my own coach.
Yeah,
We all have this board of directors that sits on our shoulder, and they're yapping at us all the time. They're talking to us all the time. They're trying to influence. We call them our subconscious. And they are talking to us all the time. They're talking to you right now. You know it because it's that voice behind, and is this thing going to be any good? Will my audience like this? Is this guy a nutcase? What is this? You know, and those voices, the most critical thing you need to do in life is to learn to manage and lead those voices, because they're not all productive. They don't all care about you, right? And you have to learn to manage them. And you can't ignore them, because if you try to do that, they come back with a vengeance. And so you have to learn to say, I don't have time. When that voice comes in and says, you're not capable, then you have to say, I hear you, but I don't have time for you right now.
yeah,
And it's a strange thing to think about, but we all do. I call it board of directors. Other people call it self-talk, whatever you want to call it. But I'm identified better when I identify them as little people talking at me.
yeah. I love that. I love the image. And what's coming to mind now as you describe this is the correlation between you start to do this in your mid-20s and you go from in your early 20s managing one furniture store to by your late 20s you're at a completely different level, right? So
Yeah,
it
exactly.
it sounds like that had a profound effect to servant leadership, yes, but also this work you were doing on yourself.
Oh yeah, self-work is critically important. You have to grow as a human being, and you have to have self-reflection, right? And another thing you have to have is a plan. You know, there's an old adage: if you don't know where you're going, any path will get you there. I believe in leading a life of intention, and I always had a 5-year plan. Let's see, I don't think I have it here right now. I have it someplace around here, but I have always had a 5-year plan for myself. Goals that I wanted to accomplish, things I wanted to do. Did I achieve them all? No. I had a goal that I had material goals. I wanted a Ferrari. Well, I could never afford a Ferrari. When I finally got to the level that I could afford a Ferrari, I went and test drove one. And I said, geez, this thing drives like a truck. You had to have a giant leg to be able to put your foot in on the clutch. Now they're automatics, but at that time, so not every goal, is worthwhile pursuing. But you have to have goals in life. You have to, number one, know who you are, define who you are as a human being, what matters to you, what your values. Have a personal mission statement, and I have a personal mission statement that goes like this: every day, I want to nurture and inspire the human spirit, beginning with myself and then for others. That's how I try to live my life. And then I have my 8 core values: honesty, fairness, respect for self and others, responsibility, integrity, trust in self and others, caring and love. And so I try to live my life according to that. And I have goals. Even at 80, I have goals. That's starting to get pretty optimistic if you have goals at 80, because who the hell knows?
I love it. Well, I mean, that must be key to the fact you still have so much vibrancy at 80. Having the purpose.
Yeah. I don't want to leave anything in the gas tank.
Right.
I want to all of a sudden coast to the end, oh, I'm out of gas.
So give me one goal, if you can think of it offhand, that you've got, in the next 5 years.
In the next 5 years, I want to be this is a kind of a education goal. I want to become really proficient on my computer.
Right.
I can only do the basic things, and I want to become really proficient.
Great. Yeah. Well, and you in terms of your mission statement, inspiring people. I mean, I can immediately sense how inspiring this is for me, and is going to be for other people. So you're living your values. I can see that how much of an impact that has. What of those values, which do you find it toughest to stay true to?
Oh, probably fairness. It's a difficult issue. What does fairness really mean? What's fair to one person is not fair to another. You can take the same action. And so I find that I have to ask people, what do you think is fair?
Yeah.
I can't prejudge it,
Yeah.
and then sometimes we have to negotiate, but
I like that. But that also speaks to servant leadership, doesn't it? Right? Like getting over on their side of the fence and
yeah.
figuring it and asking them. Yeah. I love it. Howard, is there anything we haven't touched on that you would have liked to share, that you think might be valuable for our listeners?
Well, we've touched on it a lot, but I just want to say that you need to write down have a personal mission statement. You need to write down your core values. You have to define what those core values mean to you, because a value is just a word until it turns into action. So if I say my first core value is honesty, what does that mean to me? What would I tell a white lie about? What won't I lie about? Be definitive in your answers and have them written down. And write it down, because otherwise it's just wishes, hopes, and dreams. You got to write it down, and it takes time. And none of this is written in ink. You can write in pencil. You can change anything at any time, but have a plan for your life. Take your life and divide it into its sections: spirituality, material, health and wellness, relationship with others, relationship with self, uh, experiences, travel, whatever it is that's important in your life. And then have 2 to 5 goals under each of those sections. And they may be 1, 3, and 5-year goals, but have a plan. You don't want to end up at my age and look back at your life and say, what the hell happened?
Yeah.
Well, and I can actually look back at my life and, did I get everything done that I wanted to? Am I proud of everything I did? No. But I can really pretty much look back at my life and say, hey, I did okay. I set out with some really goals, and I pretty much lived my life, not all the time. I've broken my values at times from time to time, but I've learned to forgive myself when I have. And I haven't always lived up to my mission statement, but that's okay. No human being is perfect. But don't lead your life with intention.
Yeah. Well, I think you're underplaying it, so you've done okay. To have them going, but running one furniture store in your early 20s to, president of Starbucks International with thousands of stuff.
One journey. That not everybody is going to be on my journey. Maybe their journey is to write a novel. I don't
Yeah.
care what it is. Doesn't
Yeah.
make a difference. Don't evaluate your journey. You can look at other people for motivation, and I do. I look at a broad variety of people, from dancers to musicians to writers to business people, and I salute their accomplishments, and hold myself up against them. I'm not writing the great American novel, but I can do something else,
Yeah.
right? And so that's what's important. So I'd like to leave your audience with one thing that I always like to do. I like to give them my cell phone number and my email address, and if they have any questions or they want to talk, I will always get back to people. It may take me a little while, but I always get back. So my cell phone number in the United States is 206-972-7776. And my email address is HB, it's my initials, hb@howardbehar.com. So I will always get back to you if you have a question or there's something you want to talk about. You just want to complain about your boss, call me up. Okay.
Wonderful. Thank
I'll
you.
let-
And thank you for being so generous. Yeah. To share that with the audience. Wonderful. Okay, Howard. Well, again, it's been fantastic. It's been everything I wanted it to be. Again, for people, the book, it's not about the coffee leadership principles from a life at Starbucks. We'll put a link to the book in the show description. We'll also put a link to your website, Howard, for those who want to explore more about what you've got to offer. Is there anywhere else you would send people?
Well, I have a website you can go to.
We'll put that.
I'm not trying to sell books or sell things. I'm not a consultant. I'm just trying to live my life serving others. That's what I try to do.
Wonderful. Okay. Thanks again for your time. Thank you for your message. And thank you for writing the book.
Thank you very much. Thanks for this opportunity.